along that same lines of thanking is there's always people in life that, and you know this, especially the older you get, the more this stands out to you. There's always people in life that are kind of behind the scenes, that you know they're doing things that benefit you, but you don't always see exactly what they do and the extent that they go to. And I want to take a minute just to, before we jump into the sermon today, I want to take a minute to acknowledge one of those groups of people. Is that tomorrow, as many of you know, tomorrow is Veterans Day. It's a day where we celebrate and we honor veterans, those who have served in our armed forces and have served dutifully and now are living out life as a civilian. And so we want to honor and celebrate those people because they do just that. They do so much work behind the scenes that all of us benefit from, and they sacrifice for their families and for our country in ways that we often don't see and understand. And so we just want to take a minute to honor them. So if you're here this morning and you are a veteran of any of the branches of our military, would you please stand so we can just honor you this morning? Thank you. Thank you so much for giving, for giving part of your life, for giving a large part of your life for a long time to protect the freedoms that we enjoy in our country, including the freedom that we're exercising right now to be able to gather together and to worship. So thank you so much for that. And this idea of thanks and, being thankful for those people in life that kind of do things behind the scenes that we don't always see. It got me thinking about this, and really studying this passage that we're going to be talking about today got me thinking about this question. What do you want people to line up to thank you for at the end of your life? Like when your life comes to an end, if there were going to be some people to line up to say thank you to you for something, what would you want them to thank you for? And I know that's kind of a heavy question for early in the morning, and so I'm just going to kind of let it hang there a little bit, and I promise we'll come back to it. But just let that question roll around in the back of your mind as we get going this morning, is what do you want people to line up and thank you for at the end of your life? Last week, we started a new series, and we started a new teaching series called Stories from the Road. We're continuing our study through the book of Luke that we've been doing since January, and this section of it that we're tackling, called Stories from the Road, the reason we're calling it that is because it's mostly a series of parables that Jesus told while on the road, while he was traveling to Jerusalem towards the end of his life. And last week, we looked at what was probably Jesus' most famous parable that he ever told. We looked at the parable of the lost son, and we also talked about the lost sheep and the lost coin that he talked about before that, but primarily we focused on that parable of the lost son. And now this week, we're in Luke chapter 16. So if you have a Bible with you, go ahead and open it up, get there. We'll have words on the screen as well. But in Luke chapter 16, we go directly from Jesus' most famous parable that we talked about last week to one of his most obscure parables, maybe one of his most confusing parables. This parable that we're looking at today is notoriously one of Jesus's considered one of the hardest of Jesus' parables to interpret. And the reason it's confusing for us is that, well, the wording is a little confusing for us, but mostly I think we get tripped up on this one because there's a cultural difference that we experience between our culture today and what we normally think of when we hear certain words and the culture of Jesus' day. And so that leads to a couple difficulties. One is that that cultural distance makes it difficult. But then the other reason we don't necessarily like to look at this parable is because it's about money. And we hate talking about money, especially in church, because it feels like pastors, that's all some pastors want to talk about. And so we don't like talking about money in church. But yet what's interesting is that Jesus didn't mind it at all. Matter of fact, about 40% of Jesus' parables were about money in some way. It was a topic that Jesus talked about more than heaven. It was one of his favorite topics to talk about. And actually, as we've studied through the book of Luke, money is a consistent theme throughout the book. And that's something that we really haven't talked a lot about as we've gone through this series on Luke. Because the reason is we've skipped over some passages that we previously taught on about 2 years ago when we taught a series on giving called Get Rich Quick. And so some of the passages in Luke that deal with money and with giving, we haven't dealt with them in this study because we did fairly recently. And also because we don't want to repeat the same thing over and over, because it kind of like, we don't like talking about money on a Sunday in church, let alone several Sundays in church. And so we've kind of tried to to not focus on that as much. But if Jesus talks so much about money, and if we want to love and lead and live like Jesus, then we need to talk about it too sometimes. And even though Jesus talked about money a lot, it's really interesting, though, that he never asked for it. Like, he taught his disciples and he taught people a lot about money, but there's not one recorded instance in the Gospels or any other book of the Bible where Jesus actually asked someone for money. Maybe that sounds like a surprise because you hear preachers talk about it so much, but Jesus never asked. And I think the reason for that is that when Jesus spoke about money, he was definitely up to something. Like, he had a goal in why he taught about it. He was up to something, but he wasn't after it. And you'll see what I mean as we get going. So we're just going to jump right in to Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. This is what it says. It says, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. And so he tells this story, he begins this story, he says that there's this rich man, and this rich man was so rich that he had so much stuff that he couldn't manage it all. And so he had hired a manager to kind of take care of it for him. That this manager would be someone who would have the authority to buy and sell and trade with the master's name and resources. And this verse also tells us that whoever he hired, that person, was not doing a good job. They were wasting the rich man's resources. That word wasting, it's the same word that Jesus just used in the parable of the lost son. It's the same word that he used to describe what the son was doing with his inheritance when he went off on his own, just wasting it. So eventually this rich man who has the manager, he gets wind of the fact that the manager is doing, maybe he's doing some kind of deals on the side or something. He's not dealing well with his master's belongings. And the master hears about it. He's not comfortable with it. So basically what the picture we have here is there is white-collar crime going on here. It is that this is a business role that he is in, and he is in some ways wasting the money, maybe stealing the money. So that's what's going on. We'll continue, verse 2. So he, that's the rich man, so he called him, the manager, he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer. Basically, hey, word on the street is you've not been careful with my stuff, you're not being accountable, and so you're fired, is basically the gist of that. He says, look, you're fired, and as you pack up your desk and get all your belongings together, I need you to tie up kind of all the loose ends. Like, bring me the big notebook that has all the records of all the things that you've been managing. That's essentially what he's saying to him. And then as soon as you do that, you're out. Verse 3. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg, which is really interesting. He wasn't too ashamed to steal repeatedly, but apparently he's too ashamed to beg. But he comes to a point of basically saying to himself, oh no, I was not expecting this. I didn't think that I would get caught, but now all of a sudden he finds himself in a situation where he has a little bit of time and he's got a little bit of opportunity to find out if there's going to be anybody that is going to be willing to take care of him, because he is about to be out on his own and destitute. He's got a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. He's got to decide how to use it. Verse 4. I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So basically he comes up with a plan. It says, look, when I'm no longer employed with this rich guy, which is going to include losing his home, because servants would have lived, at least on the property or maybe in the same house as their master. When I lose my job, I'm going to need a place, and I'm going to need some people to help me out. And so he comes up with this plan to make sure that he's still going to have some place to go and someone to help him out along the way. And so he hatches this plan, and here's what he does, verse 5. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. And he tells him, remember, did you catch it in there? He tells him to do it quickly. Basically, I recognize I have limited time. And our first response when we hear what this manager has done by just cutting those bills in half or really discounting them a lot, we hear that, and our first response, hearing it from our 21st century perspective, is, what a crook, right? What's he doing? He's just going to get himself in worse trouble. He's already been wasting the master's resources. Now it seems like he's just willy-nilly just giving stuff away, trying to get, earn favor with people. He's going to get himself in even more trouble. And this is where our cultural distance from Jesus' day confuses us a little bit. See, the manager works for the rich guy, and we naturally assume, in our context today, that means he receives a wage from his master. But in first century culture, this role that he's in of manager actually would not have been a paid position. That this manager would have been put in charge of the master's estates, and the way the manager would make his money was by adding fees onto the bills of all the people that owed the master. And so when a debtor would come in to pay their bill, they didn't know exactly how much they owed to the master versus what was going to be going to the manager's fee. And so when they would pay up, the manager basically would pocket his portion and then pass on what was owed to his master to take care of the debt. And that was the way that it worked. The master got paid. The manager got paid. The debtor knew he was probably getting cheated in there somewhere, but the debt got taken care of. But there was no way to really know who owed what and who was getting how much. All we knew was the master was getting theirs and the manager was getting theirs, but we didn't really know how that all shook out. In fact, those high fees that the manager would charge, when we hear that, we assume that that's probably why his master's upset with him. Is that this manager is probably adding such large fees to the debts that people owe that it's making it too expensive for people to pay, and so the master's cash flow is getting cut off because this manager is basically pricing people out of being able to repay their debts. And so no money's coming in, the master gets upset, and the manager finds himself in this situation. And so when the manager gets called out for his behavior, he tries to provide for himself a kind of a soft landing spot by greatly or maybe completely lowering his fees. He cuts that part off of what he had told people they owe. And so the people who owe, you can imagine they're thrilled with this news. And they're like, this is great. I only owe half of what I owed, or you just gave me a 20% discount? That sounds fantastic. Thank you. And you can imagine also them saying, hey, thank you. If you ever need anything, give me a call. And the manager's like, well, I just might. Maybe sooner than you think. And the implication is that this manager does this, not with just the two debtors that are spoken of in the parable, but the idea is that he does this with lots of them. That he is slashing prices, that he is cutting his fees to curry favor with a whole lot of people. And then the master hears about that too. He hears about what's going on. Look at verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. Now, this sounds weird to us, right? Like, why would you commend dishonesty? But that's not what's happening here. Again, this is part of our cultural distance. The way we hear words is different than they were intended here. See, this master is not commending the manager for being dishonest. He's recognizing, hey, you've been dishonest from the very beginning. That's why I'm calling you dishonest. But he's saying, look, I'm commending you because you were able to look at your situation and you were able to look at the little resources you had and the little time you had left. And you were able to make a wise decision with it. He'd been dishonest in wasting the master's wealth previously. The master fires the guy, and when the master ends up getting all the money that he's owed, he's happy too. But he sees, I understand what the manager did to be able to set himself up, and he's impressed by it. So he commends him for acting shrewdly. Ken commends him because he recognizes that this guy thought it through. That he thought through what he was doing, and he thought it through with the future in mind. He thought it through with his limited opportunity and his limited time in mind. And it's at this point where Jesus kind of ends the parable. And he steps out of the parable and he begins to connect. He begins to connect it with the lesson that he wants the people there listening to him that day and what he wants you and I to know. He's trying to help them understand that in the kingdom of God, that God looks at money and wealth and possessions so much differently than we do. And so Jesus pulls back from the parable and he looks at the people listening around him and he looks at you and he looks at me and he says this in the second half of verse 8. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. Basically says, look, the people of this world, the people who think that life is simply the time between your birth certificate and your death certificate, the people who just think like this life is all there is, he's saying they oftentimes are more shrewd, that they think things through better. They make decisions based on their limited opportunity and their limited time better sometimes than God's people do. And that idea expands to us today as well. That sometimes the people who believe that this life is all there is think things through better than those of us who are supposed to think in terms of eternity. The manager took full advantage of the little time and the little opportunity and the little resources that he had. And Jesus' point for us is simply that we're to do the same. That when it comes to our money, our wealth, our income, we are to invest in our future with him by asking, how do I get the most out of this little slice of time and this little slice of resources that I have been trusted with now? And then Jesus leans in and he gets really specific because he wants to make sure that we don't miss it. Jesus gives an imperative. He gives a command. That if you're a follower of Jesus, this is something Jesus says, hey, you need to do this. He goes on in verse 9. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, not if it's gone, when it's gone, translation, when you're gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. He says to use wealth, which means that wealth bad if Jesus is telling us to use it. He says to use it, and when it's gone, don't miss this. The point he's pushing home here is that there's something that we can do with temporary wealth during this little slice of time that we have in life that makes an eternal impact. Your use of material resources has an eternal impact. Your right now, everyday resources have the potential to make a forever difference. We all know this. We can't take it with us, right? We know that when we pass away, we cannot take our money, our stuff, we cannot take it with us. But there is a way to have something to show for it beyond this life. So we go back to the question that we started with. What do you want people to line up to thank you for at the end of your life? And when I said that the first time, you may have gotten a mental picture in your mind of you laying in a hospital bed someday, or in your bed, you're old and the time is almost there, and there's this line of people out the door and they're coming in, and that's not the picture I'm trying to paint for you. Or maybe you had a picture of maybe someday at your funeral that there, but maybe you got a bird's eye view of it from up above or something, and you see all the people coming up to, walking by past the casket and saying their respects, or maybe the open mic that some people do at funerals, and people are coming up and they're talking about you, and you're thinking about the things that you would like them to say, but that's not the picture I'm trying to paint for you. What do you want people to line up to thank you for at the end of your life? Why do you want the people who are waiting to welcome you into your eternal dwelling? Why do you want them to be there waiting for you? What would cause them to give attention to you when they are already in the presence of our Lord? Your use of material resources has eternal impact. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the way you use your money is the way you get to heaven. We're not saying that at all. The way we get to spend eternity in heaven with Jesus is through grace in faith in Jesus alone. That it's only a free gift from him because of the life that he lived on our behalf, and in taking our sin as punishment, taking that punishment upon himself. That is the way we get to heaven. But the way you use money is not the way you get into heaven, but the way you use money now will have an impact on your experience of heaven when you get there. And that impact, it's not a what, it's a who. Jesus is going to be there no matter what, but who else will be there to welcome you? And when you begin to ask this question, then money begins to loosen its grip on your heart. And you begin to see it as a tool to be used in pursuit of something beyond this life. Jesus follows up his teaching, his parable that he shared. He follows it up with some points of application. And he begins with a very basic principle that we've all probably heard before. In Luke chapter 16, verse 10, he says this: "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with very much." Basically what he's saying here is, look, faithfulness is not an accident. It's not an accident. It's a decision that happens. It arises out of usually several intentional decisions that are held fast to no matter what comes. And this is true in every area of life. It's not true of only finances, but it's true in every area. The idea is that you decide who you want to be, and then you stick to it. And you don't let life dictate to you who you're going to be based on what's happening in any particular moment or any particular season. Who you are in the small moments is who you will be in the big moments. And as it relates to money, that means that making some decisions ahead of time will shape your allegiance to God. When you're able to decide, how can I use the limited time and resources I have to make an eternal difference? This is why all the time I tell a lot of young couples to decide now what percentage of your income you want to live on. And that sounds like weird advice, right? That sounds like a weird thing to say to somebody, but when you slow down and actually think about it, this is true of every single one of us. You already live on a certain percentage of your income. Maybe you're living on 100% of your income. Maybe you're living on less than that. But every single one of us is already living on a percentage of our income. Why in the world would you not choose what that percentage is rather than letting a lifestyle decide it for you? And I know, a lot of times we find ourselves in situations in life where we feel like life has dictated to us the percentage that we're able to live on. The life circumstances right now, that's what is telling me what I have to be able to live on. But that's not true. What's actually happened there is life has just soaked up to percentage that you didn't plan for. Planning and investing in your eternal future is what shrewd, forward-thinking people do. And I say this not to try and convince you to give more money to the church. Like, it's not something like that. I say this as a thoroughly satisfied customer. To get a little personal with you, like when Jackie and I were getting married, we did this from the very beginning, is that we sat down, and the very first time we ever wrote out our budget, we wrote out and we decided from the very beginning on a specific percentage of our income that we would invest in eternity. That there was a certain portion that we were going to give to our church. There was another portion that we were going to give to certain things that God had kind of put on our heart that we felt Him urging us toward. And then we stuck to it. And sometimes we revisit it and we kind of talk and like, hey, I think we might be able to give a little bit more for this season. And other times we don't. But I can say honestly that we've never given less, and we've never regretted it. And I've never met someone who did that and regretted it. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I just want you to experience something that has been great for us. Something that we have tasted and seen. And that so many Christ followers before us have experienced as well. Because the impact is beyond anything in this life. And sometimes in life we get a small picture of the impact that it has, even with the people that we know in life. Sometimes we get to see the impact in the lives of real people that we know. Some of you may remember this. About a year ago, around this time, we were talking about our budget as a church. And we asked many of you to consider the percentage you were giving to the church, and if you would possibly increase it for the coming year. And many of you did that, and you have faithfully stuck to that. And we can look at it now and we can see that this year, at this time, our offerings are up about 20% than what they were last year. That over the course of the last 11 months, you have been faithful in that. And it's no wonder that your faithful investment is already showing up in eternity. You've probably noticed over the last several months, you've probably noticed that we've had more people choosing to get baptized. We've had more people coming to the church and connecting in our children's ministry and in our youth ministry and really at every age level in the church. And I want to say this to you. If you have ever given to the work that God is doing through this church, then you are a part of the results. That every single decision someone makes to follow Jesus, every decision they make to be baptized, every child that hears the gospel every week in Kids Zone, every student that walks into our student ministry and makes connections with peers and adults who love Jesus, every single teen mom who comes to our building on Thursdays for Young Lives to come and to learn and to know more about Jesus, every adult who finds encouragement in the face of struggle and grief going on in their life, and every single person whose life is changed for God through the ministry of the different missions that we support in our community and around the world. And I could go on and on and on with that list, but I think you get the point. Every single one of them is a part of your story. Because on some level, you made a shrewd decision with the time and the resources that you had available. And you're a part of someone else's story. The people who came before you gave. And it allowed you to hear the gospel. Maybe not at this church, maybe at another church, but in some ways, someone, because of their generosity and the way that they were faithful to God in their giving, it led you to the Lord. And a lot of those people are people that you'll never meet in this life. Your use of material resources has an eternal impact. Now, Jesus' teaching here in this passage, it's not over, but we can go through the last kind of section of it fairly quickly. Let's look at verse 11. Jesus continues. He says, "So, if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, Who will trust you with true riches? Jesus' point is this. Look, not only is your money, your wealth, possessions, your income, not only do they give you the potential to have an eternal impact, but from God's perspective, your finances are a test. See, like the manager in the parable, we all have a little bit of time and a little bit of resources, and we are being tested to determine whose kingdom we are most devoted to. The limited kingdom of this world that we see and experience every day, or the limitless kingdom of heaven that that for those of us who will trust Jesus for salvation from our sin and follow him, that will be the kingdom that we will see and experience for eternity. Jesus keeps going, verse 12. And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Yeah, we hear that and we go, wait, what do you mean someone else's property? Like, this is mine. I earned it. I worked for this. I earned it. My name is on the account. My name is on the deed. And Jesus says, no, it was given to you. And it'll still be there when you're gone, and it'll be given to another. Because it's not yours. We like to think that the way our money and possessions work is like this: is that if I'm not able to care for my own things, then I won't be fit to handle other people's things, other things that are not mine. But Jesus reverses that. He says, look, the money that you have already isn't yours. It is a gift. And the moment you think you own it, it owns you. All of us, every single one of us, are managers. We're not owners. And you know this because, like we said a couple times, you can't take it with you. Clearly, you don't own something that you can't take with you. You're just managing it. And if that's true, if you are just a manager and not an owner, then the next question is this: who are you managing it for? See, if you think that we're all just like the product of unguided natural processes, just part of this ongoing cycle with no meaning and no intention behind it, then I don't know how to answer that question for you. But if you believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and that God created mankind in his image to be stewards of this world and of our little sliver of time and resources, then suddenly all of this makes perfect sense. So Jesus finishes, he wraps it up with this in verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Basically what he's saying here is, look, if your money doesn't serve God, you will serve your money. If your money doesn't serve God, then the natural tendency, the natural drift is toward accumulation and consumption and upgrades and a house full of stuff that you will then leave behind for other people to fight over. Nobody chooses that on purpose. Nobody's like, you know what? I want to get to the end of my life and have a whole bunch of stuff that really means nothing once I'm gone, and then I want to cause conflict with the other people in my life who think that they then have a stake in it, and nobody wants that. But if you don't decide to give your money eternal significance, that is where your life will drift. Your use of material resources has an eternal impact. So what do you want people to line up to thank you for at the end of your life? As followers of Jesus, this is what we want. We want people to line up and to say, thank you so much for giving me the chance to know him. That's what you want to be thanked for at the end of your life. That is the only thing that you can hear as you step into eternity with God. That's the only thing you can hear from the other people there that will make you look back and go, yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you for giving me the chance to know him. We're going to finish up here and we're going to sing a song. As we do, the chorus of this song says this, and I hope that this is where you've been led this morning. It leads us to a simple praise to God, a simple opening of our hands and surrender, and we just sing this to Him. We say, what can I say? What can I do? But offer this heart completely to you. As we wrap up this morning, if today is the day where you need to take that step, to say it's time for me to surrender completely, and maybe that, for some of you, that means like I've been kind of surrendered, but I need to surrender in some other areas. Maybe that's your money, maybe that's your habits, maybe that's your relationships. I don't know what it is for you. But for some of you, it means a more complete surrender. And for some of you, it may mean a surrender for the first time. That for the first time, you say, God, you have allowed me to have my sin taken care of. You have allowed me to not pay a debt that I owe. And all I can do in response is to surrender and to say, okay, what do you want? What do you want? What can I give from my life? And to surrender in every way. If that's you this morning, I'd love to talk with you. I'll be in the back. Let's pray together. Father, we love you. We thank you so much for Jesus. We thank you for the price that you paid for us on the cross. We thank you for the riches that we have in life with you. We thank you for the way that you provide for us in life, but God, we also thank you for the opportunity you give us to then be a part of what you are doing for eternity. God, would you take our hands off the wheel? Would you unclench our fists from the things that we think are ours? Would you help us to surrender to you? Would you help us to do it in a way that allows more and more and more people to experience your love in the way that we have, that allows them to taste and to see